We continue to follow the very interesting and sometimes contentious races for Congress. Tonight, we're going to go back to District 4. And the seat that was empty last time here in the studio is now full with the incumbent, Barney Frank. And joining us once again, Sean Bielat, a Marine and businessman. You are the Republican challenger in this race. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. And I would like to say before we even begin, this is not a long debate. So I ask that you respect each other when answering questions. Please do not talk over one another. And I do, of course, encourage a spirited debate. I love that. But I want both sides to be heard. Mr. Bielat, the last time you were here, I asked you what you would ask the congressman. Here's your chance. You see him sitting right there. Go ahead and ask your question.
Well, thank you. I'd like to start with asking about the congressman's role in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. He said a lot yesterday about how he didn't have any responsibility for anything because after 2003 he was pushing rental housing. But the record shows otherwise. The record shows in 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007 that he was on the other side of the issue. And in fact, when he was chairman in 2007, he even co-sponsored with Maxine Waters, a bill called the American Homeownership Extension Act. And I'm just wondering how the congressman can reconcile those clear actions on the issues with his statements yesterday.
Congressman Frank?
Easily. The Republican Party controlled both houses of Congress from 1995 to 2006. I was in the minority. In 2003, I was too sanguine about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I was wrong about them. But I was in the minority, and the Republicans who were in the majority weren't trying to do anything. In 2005, the Republicans in the House did pass a bill. The Republicans in the Senate killed that bill. Nothing happened to reform Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac until 2007 when I became chairman of the committee. So in the minority, I was first wrong. I then changed my position when George Bush was pushing them to do more home ownership for low-income people who shouldn't have had it. But the record is indisputable. From 1995 to 2006, with the Republicans running the House, nothing happened. In 2007, when I became chairman, within that same year, we passed restrictions on executive compensation. We also passed a bill to ban the predatory lending that the Republicans wouldn't allow us to pass, and we passed the legislation to put Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac under strict rules. And in 2008, when George Bush, as Secretary of the Treasury, decided to use the legislation the Democrats had given him, that the Republicans never did, to put them in a conservatorship, as he says in his book, the first thing he did when he thought they might resist him was to call me, and I said, go ahead, I'll back you up. So that's the answer. The Republicans did nothing for 12 years on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we did it in a year and a half.
All right, Congressman, then I would like to ask you a question about this. As you know, you've been criticized a lot in the past about this. Over the collapse, I want you to tell everybody what you think your role was in this collapse of the housing market. What responsibility do you take? Did you make a mistake here?
I made a mistake in 2003 in not seeing the problem with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. But the Republicans were in control and nothing happened. I didn't become chairman, didn't have any real ability to affect this until 2007. Tom DeLay ran a very tight ship as a Republican. I could be an advocate for my district. I could get some things done. But I couldn't overcome the Republicans' view.
Mr. Bielat, would you like to respond to that?
I sure would. The congressman hasn't addressed. What the congressman hasn't addressed is H.R. 1852, the bill he co-sponsored with Maxine Waters, called the American Homeownership Extension Act, while he was chairman in 2007. What he's saying doesn't really address or reflect the reality of the various statements he made publicly, but most importantly, it overlooks this act, which is very clearly aimed at extending home ownership and, in fact, directs the FHA to lift its requirements where it concerns risky loans.
Congressman?
Let me respond. First of all, in 2004, we did want people to own homes, but not people who couldn't afford it. In 2004, again in the minority, I co-sponsored with some other Democrats, unfortunately it was partisan, legislation to stop predatory lending. The Republicans said, oh no, you're interfering with the free market. Once again, it wasn't until 2007 when the Democrats were in the majority when we passed a bill in the House to stop predatory lending. That doesn't mean we wanted no home ownership. Of course home ownership is good if it's for people who can afford it. And the answer to your question is, what was my responsibility? I was late to see this problem, but it, unfortunately, when I was in the minority, had no impact. The Republicans controlled the Congress and passed only one bill in 2005, and it died in a fight between the Republican House and the Republican Senate. The Republican chairman in the committee in the House said that George Bush had given him the one-finger salute. Now we're back to WTF, I guess, again. But the point is that it wasn't until I became the chairman in 2007 that the Congress passed the bill that ultimately put them in a conservatorship, and that finally in 2010, we did pass a law that Mr. Bielat opposes to outlaw predatory loans.
All right.
So we did put on the books a law outlawing those kind of bad loans. Mr. Bielat's opposed to it.
Okay, Congressman, you just said that again. So now let's try to move on from this subject for just a second. We can come back to this if we have time. Congressman, Mr. Bielat just asked you a question. Now's your chance to ask him a question.
Well, Mr. Bielat, you've differed with me in terms of reducing the extent to which America subsidizes Japan, England, Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark militarily. And instead, you said, because I think that's a major step to be reducing the deficit, you said we should be raising the Social Security retirement age. You've supported the plans of Paul Ryan that says no Medicare for people who are not already 55, and you're for some privatization of Social Security. What I want to know is, to what age would you raise it? How much privatization would you allow? And for people under 55 who would not get Medicare, you said they'd get a voucher. What would that voucher be worth, and would they have some guarantee that it would always be enough for their medical needs?
Mr. Bielat, you guys actually wrote each other letters back and forth on this very subject. I know that Congressman Frank asked you this question in the letter, and you answered. Would you like to answer here right now?
Well, I'd like to start by saying yesterday I heard a lot about how we should slash defense to pay for these various programs, and I think the congressman's confused. We can never strengthen the economy by weakening our defense. It just doesn't work that way. If we were to cut defense entirely, we still wouldn't be able to pay for these programs. We have to be realistic. And so, doing nothing and hoping for the best is just not a plan for resolving these serious issues we have with Social Security and our other entitlement programs. Most Americans realize that left to their own devices, left in the form that they are today, that those programs will not be around for my generation, for our kids' generation.
So, Mr. Bielat, how old should the retirement age be?
There's 4 potential fixes that I've discussed, and depending on which factor you put on each, you could change the age. So maybe it's 70, maybe it's 69, maybe it's 68. If the answer were easy, it would have already been made. Well, so the idea that I'm going to sit here and say here's a distinctive number so that Mr. Frank can attack me on it is kind of silly. What we need are serious attempts to solve this problem.
Can I say,
not filibustering,
hold on,
not attacks, not fear-mongering like we're hearing from Mr. Frank, but serious, sober discussions of the facts and of the challenges, and then attempts to legislate on those challenges.
Okay, he answered the question. Your turn.
Yes. First of all, the only fear-mongering I've heard is Mr. Bielat saying that if we stop subsidizing the military budgets of England, Germany, and the Netherlands, we're going to put America at risk. We are paying for the military budgets of wealthy nations elsewhere, and they then cut their own budgets and outcompete us in some areas. So this notion, I would bring the troops back from Iraq. I don't think that would endanger America at all if we would do that quickly. Secondly, I don't understand why it's fear-mongering. Mr. Bielat said we're going to raise the retirement age, but doesn't want to say to what age. He says they'll start privatizing Social Security. He says this won't affect existing recipients. But if, in fact, you stop the revenue stream going to Social Security and put it elsewhere, then you don't get the money to pay Social Security. So I don't understand why it's fear-mongering to talk about this. I do agree that we need to do something about Social Security. I do agree we need to do something about Medicare. He and I agree, and I give him credit. He's one of the few Republicans I've heard who says let's raise taxes in one way, because he and I agree
that you
take the Social Security. May I explain this, please? He said it yesterday. He wants to expand the base on which Social Security taxes are levied. That's a tax increase for people making more than $100,000. He and I agree that that's an important contribution to Social Security fiscal stability.
All right, Congressman. Mr. Bielat, did you say you wanted to raise taxes?
No. That would actually be an offset that would allow for a portion of Social Security to go into privatized accounts.
No, that's not
but I
the
think,
point.
no, actually it is. I wish you wouldn't interrupt me, though.
Keep going, Mr. Bielat.
Thank you. I'd actually like to go back to the previous statement about this defense and what we should cut and what we shouldn't. Mr. Frank has been famously quoted as saying, let's roll the dice on home ownership. Now he's suggesting that we roll the dice on our security posture. I think most Americans saw what happened when we went that direction the first time, and I think we're uncomfortable now with leaving judgments about how we should secure this nation in Barney Frank's hands. The idea that we're just going to slash our defense spending and somehow pay for all these things in an ill-defined manner in a short period of time, it just doesn't make sense. And it's a little surprising to me, frankly, that this is the basis of Mr. Frank's plan for entitlement reform.
Well, let me respond. First of all, Mr. Bielat
quickly, Congressman.
Mr. Bielat is for raising taxes. The offset he's talking about is for taking money into private plans. But he is for increasing the base on which, he said this several times, increasing the base on which Social Security taxes are levied. That's a tax increase for other people. Secondly, the fact is that we are subsidizing all of our European allies. And Mr. Bielat has said, well, we've got to fill the power vacuum. Russia and Europe won't do it. Well, I think it's time for us to tell people that we simply won't be the sucker anymore. And no, it will not hurt America's defenses, in my judgment, if we bring non-combat troops back from Iraq, where they're simply negotiating military and political disputes, which isn't an appropriate function for the American military.
All right, Congressman, thank you. A couple of hours ago, a federal judge actually issued a worldwide injunction stopping the enforcement of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which basically ends the military's 17-year ban on openly gay troops. What is your reaction to that, Mr. Bielat?
Well, I haven't read the decision. It seems surprising to me that a federal judge would suddenly find the authority to do that. And actually, the ban goes much further than Don't Ask, Don't Tell in '93. It goes back considerably before that. I don't know. Once I find out more about the decision, maybe I'll have a more informed opinion. That just came out tonight. I would say, going back a moment.
What's your policy on Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
I think the current policy should stay in place until the Department of Defense, after a thorough assessment of the issue, decides of its own volition that it's in the best interest of national security to change the policy. It shouldn't be changed. Once the Department of Defense makes that decision, I'll be on board.
Congressman Frank?
Well, I disagree with that. The Department of Defense tells us how to fight wars, but it doesn't make national policy. That's a violation of the norm of civilian control. In fact, the House of Representatives has voted to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. A majority of the Senate has voted for it. They just couldn't break a filibuster. And the President has said it. Colin Powell, who was for it 17 years ago, says America's outgrown that sense that their people will be uncomfortable. I don't see why we should tell tens of thousands of patriotic, brave young Americans, very able, who want to serve this country in the military, that they can't do it because somebody else doesn't like what they do on their off hours. So I'm glad that the policy is no longer with us.
Congressman Frank, thank you. Very interesting report out of Washington. It's the Cook Political Report, which I want to stress is nonpartisan. And it's now showing that this has the potential to shape up your district as a competitive race, and that actually shifted just this past weekend, because before this past weekend, this race was considered safe for the Democrats, safe for you. That is not the case now. Why is that, Congressman Frank?
Well, you left out what they shifted it to, likely Democratic. So they did say it was safe. Now they say I am likely to win.
Right, but now it says it has the potential to move in that direction.
Well,
where prior to that, it was not like that. You were.
I'm sorry, but I was trying to answer you.
Okay,
was I
go
not
ahead.
Supposed to?
No, you are supposed to.
Okay, thank you. It went from being safe to being likely. Yes, I think that the fact is that in this election year, nobody should take anything for granted. And he did say that he thinks I'm likely to win. My own view, though, frankly, is that as a candidate, my job is to talk about the public policies I support, why I think we can reduce the deficit by going after military subsidies. I think the handicapping is best left to others. But if you raise it, I would note that he said it went from being a safe seat to being a likely seat. There were several other categories.
But it's moving in a direction, Congressman.
Excuse me?
It's moving in a different direction, and I want to know why you think that is.
Because there was a great deal of uncertainty. A number of other races were fit there, too. But again, I'm curious as to why you are talking about the movement, but what it's being moved to. There are three categories there. There's toss-up, there's leaning Democratic, and there's likely Democratic.
Yep.
This one is likely Democratic. So he says, I'm likely to win. My own view is that this kind of prognostication is best left to others, and we ought to talk about the public policies we advocate.
Mr. Bielat, your reaction to it quickly, because we have to wrap this debate up.
Well, I'm not at all surprised to learn that he doesn't know why it's moving in that direction. It's that sort of detachment, that sort of lack of understanding of what's going on here in the 4th Congressional District, which has led us to where we are today. Mr. Frank is wrong on the issues. He's out of touch with his constituents, and that's what happens after you're in Washington for 30 years. I'm a Marine, I'm a businessman. I want to take everyday experience down to Washington and then come back in a couple years. I don't want to make a career of it. I want to go down and make a difference.
Gentlemen, I do appreciate you coming by our FOX25 studios to participate in our congressional debates. Sean Bielat, Congressman Barney Frank, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. You want to see all of our debates, profiles of the candidates? You know where to go. Our website, myfoxboston.com. Click on politics and check it all out.